remember when I first went to go see Inside Out in the theaters. I was a young adult going through a very difficult season of depression and anxiety. Like all young adults, I was trying to grapple with the world and my new place in it. I was wondering where the time had gone. I had missed my childhood and its comparative simplicity. I wasn't expecting too much from Inside Out. I sat down in the theater, the lights dimmed, and the room grew quiet. The next thing I remember were the chills that came over me as Michael Giacchino's breathtaking score began with a simple piano melody over a sweeping shot of the Disney castle, before fading into the vibrant hum of the first act. It was at that moment that I realized this was going to be something special. An hour and a half later, and my heart had been broken to pieces and mended again with a story that could only be described as beautiful. I know it's not that way for everyone, but for me, Inside Out became one of the most resonant Pixar movies of all time. This movie about emotions somehow helped me process mine and cope with the difficult reality of growing up in a time when I needed it the most. It helped my sadness lighten with a bit of joy. For years, I've been trying to understand why Inside Out meant so much to me personally. Now, a half a decade later, I finally feel like I can revisit the simplistic beauty of this masterpiece and share it with others. In a world where emotions like depression have become more widely discussed and understood, and where so many people around the world have united to share their personal experiences through social media, I would argue that Inside Out has become even more relevant. It embodies a kind of cathartic experience, of explaining what many people may feel inside, but might not necessarily have the words to express in the way that they would like. It's a movie that, despite being animated, manages to grapple with the deep issues of unexpected life changes, sorting through complex emotions, and the difficulty of growing up. It's said that the film's director, Pete Docter, had the idea for the movie when his own daughter began to face a very difficult time in her own life. Usually a very joyful and outgoing child, Docter explained how he had begun to notice that she had become quieter and more reserved. He couldn't understand what had happened, and so endeavored to find out why. Like any artist, the path to understanding lay in his art. So Docter and a few of his friends at Pixar began to work with real psychologists and craft a story around a girl processing her unknown feelings through the lens of her emotions, which would serve as the main characters. But Docter still couldn't quite crack the story. He knew that he wanted the emotion of Joy, who would be the main character, to have an arc that saw her mature with the girl she was a part of, to learn how to survive in a new way through the trials of major change. But something wasn't working. The arc just simply felt wrong. After months and months of wrestling with his ideas and the original concepts, Docter had the realization that he had been approaching the whole story from the wrong angle. To quote Docter himself, "I started thinking, alright, what if I lost everything? What would mean something to me?" And like most of us, I think the answer is relationships. Emotions are the key to relationships, and by that, I mean that the people you feel the most deeply connected with are the people that, yes, you've had the good times with, but the people that really mean something deeply are those that I have cried with, that I've been pissed off at, that I've experienced fear with. It's all the aspects of emotions that bond us together. He realized that Riley needed to embrace sadness. Even though Joy was the one we were following on the journey, she could not stay the main character. Docter believed that the key to Joy's character arc was the fact that she wasn't the only one that was significant to Riley's growth as a person. The entire time, he had thought that Joy needed to triumph and survive the change in Riley. But then he realized that the answer was more complicated than that. In order to grow as people, we can't just bury the bad. Our joy needs to work with our sadness. And the same was true with the characters that represented those emotions in his story. Suddenly, Joy's arc was accepting that she was part of a team, and that reflected in Riley's arc in learning to finally accept and understand the change in her emotions, and learn that the difficult emotions, the heartache, the pain, were part of the process. Inside Out taught me that I could find joy in the sadness, that the depression didn't have to be my only state of being, but also that there wasn't something wrong with me for not feeling happy 100% of the time. This story executes these concepts perfectly, and there are 3 specific scenes that I believe exemplify this genius storytelling. Consequently, these are the 3 moments of the movie that made me sob like a baby, but that's beside the point. Still, for context, it's important to point out the aforementioned opening scene of the film, because it perfectly sets up every feeling that we will experience throughout the film, where Riley, and subsequently Joy, are born, and the world is new and fresh, and there's just the 2 of them. The little bundle of joy. Until, of course, Sadness is born, and instantly clashes with Joy as she seems to steal Riley's first moment of peace. This sums up the entire arc in one simple, beautiful scene and tells us what the growth and conflict in this film is going to be about. Then, of course, the film fast-forwards through Riley's life a bit, and reinforces that Joy perceives herself as the dominant leader, that she thinks every emotion has a purpose for Riley, albeit through the lens of Joy's dominance, except for the ever-annoying sadness. And when Riley's life is turned upside down and nobody knows what to do about Riley's strange change in mentality, the film goes to great lengths to reinforce that Joy's belief is that it's her responsibility and hers alone to help Riley. She still believes she's the only one that matters. She loves Riley more than anything else in the world, but it's a selfish kind of love that believes that Joy is the only thing Riley needs to experience in life. With that context, the journey back to headquarters is all about restoring order and putting Riley back where she was by returning Joy to her place in center stage. And it isn't until Joy meets Bing Bong that everything starts to become clearer. All of this context finally bears fruit. Bing Bong was intended to be an allegory for Riley's childhood, and a representation of the old way that Joy wants to go back to. But in the scene where Bing Bong despairs over Riley not wanting to play with him anymore through the loss of his rocket, Joy is not able to help him. It's sadness that shows sympathy, and sadness that helps Bing Bong process and move past the situation. Suddenly, through Joy's amazement at sadness offering a solution where she could not, we realize that maybe something isn't quite right about Joy being the only thing that Riley needs. Which brings us to the first scene I mentioned that made me cry. The memory dump. This scene is simply heart-wrenching. We come to fully understand what Riley means to Joy. She adores Riley with all her heart. It's in that moment of deep despair when she thinks she's going to disappear and that she's never going to be a part of Riley's life again that Joy hits her lowest point as a character, and it sets her up to learn her greatest lesson later on. And if that's not enough, the second scene, which directly follows the first, absolutely wrecked me in the theater, because it reinforced and punctuated the first. Bing Bong sees how deeply Joy loves Riley, and he's convinced that Joy is still needed in Riley's life. So, realizing that his time in Riley's life is over, but that Joy's is not, Bing Bong sacrifices himself for Joy. This scene represents the end of Riley's childhood, and is an allegory for the importance of retaining a bit of joy, albeit a changed and more mature joy, through the process of growing up. This is exemplified in Bing Bong's final line as he fades away.
Take her to the moon for me, okay?
Finally, in the very last scene of the movie, Joy learns her lesson, and her arc is completed in a sequence that can only be described as breathtaking in its artistic genius. Somehow, our filmmakers managed to sum up all of the feelings and emotions presented in the film, and tie together all of the themes and character arcs in one beautiful, simple stroke. Even the music, which I can't really analyze here due to the usual copyright problems, manages to tie the emotional musical themes connected to our characters' growth together in a gut-punching score that punctuates the whole experience in a way that I could only dream of doing. Hats off to the totally underrated, longtime Pixar collaborator and composer, Michael Giacchino. Your work always brings me to tears. In this scene, we come to realize that Riley still needs joy, but that joy needs to be mixed with sadness. We see that in order to move on from this experience, that Riley needs to process and acknowledge her sadness instead of trying to push it away, just like Joy learned with her experience in embracing the character of sadness herself. And it's in that moment where Joy accepts her new role as part of a team, instead of a dominating force, that her arc is completed to coincide with Riley's own arc. Joy re-enters Riley's life in a brand new, more complex, and more meaningful way through her experience with sadness, just like Riley's own growth as a more emotionally complex person. It's an absolutely astounding and tangible way to express the seemingly inexpressible concept of a young girl facing her emotions and growing through them. And although these aren't the only reasons why Inside Out is brilliant, they are the ones that stuck with me the most. This uncanny ability that Pixar has to explain the unexplainable and tackle deep issues of the heart and mind is what will always make me love these movies, and why I think Inside Out in particular is a masterpiece.